For 33 years, David Letterman sat across from the biggest stars on the planet. He was a titan of late-night television, a master of the interview, but not every guest was a welcome one. While he made millions laugh behind that iconic gap-toothed smile, some guests could truly test his patience. Now, let's be clear, Dave has never published a formal, laminated blacklist of stars he hated. But if you dig through decades of his own public comments, backstage stories, and some of the most infamously disastrous moments in TV history, you can piece together a pretty clear list. These aren't just awkward interviews. These are the on-air train wrecks that landed them on a list of guests that many believe Letterman would have been happy to never see again. David Letterman. For more than 3 decades, from his groundbreaking late night on NBC to his celebrated run with The Late Show on CBS, the name was synonymous with a certain kind of television magic. He was the oddball king of 12:30, then the respected elder statesman of 11:30. Across more than 6,000 episodes, he redefined the talk show, blending a Midwestern sensibility with a razor-sharp, often absurdist, wit. He could be goofy, dropping watermelons off rooftops. He could be profound, guiding New York City and the nation through its grief after 9/11s, but, above all, he was an interviewer with a skill all his own. Unlike the smooth, fawning style of his predecessors, a Letterman interview was an unpredictable ride. He was allergic to fluff. He despised prepackaged anecdotes and phony Hollywood sentiment. He wanted something real, something spontaneous, even if it got uncomfortable. His genius was in his ability to poke and prod, to deconstruct the celebrity artifice until a flicker of the real person emerged. For guests who were willing to play along, who got his rhythm and appreciated his intelligence, an appearance on Letterman could be a career highlight. They were in on the joke, and the audience loved them for it. But what happened when they weren't? In on the joke? What happened when a guest showed up with their own agenda, a massive ego, or a profound lack of self-awareness? The result was often television history for all the wrong reasons. These weren't just bad interviews. They were spectacular car crashes. They were moments of excruciating tension, of open hostility, of such profound awkwardness that you just couldn't look away. Over the years, Letterman has spoken candidly about his experiences and the guests who truly got under his skin. Based on a careful study of his career, his own words, and the most notorious segments from his show, a handful of names rise to the surface again and again, each one tied to an interview gone horribly wrong. This is not a list of mere annoyances. This is a countdown of the on-air disasters. The moments that tested a television legend's composure, and the guests who, through their actions, seemed to earn a special place in late-night infamy. We begin our countdown with a clash of worlds that was probably inevitable. On one side, David Letterman, the seasoned, cynical, and intellectually demanding host. On the other, Paris Hilton, the heiress and reality TV star, who, in the mid-2000s, was the living embodiment of a new kind of fame, one built on branding and paparazzi. In September 2007, these two forces collided, creating an interview that was less of a conversation and more of a 6-minute siege. To get the tension, you have to remember the context. A few months earlier, Hilton had served 23 days in jail for a probation violation. The story was a media frenzy. By September, Hilton was on a comeback tour to promote her new fragrance, according to Hilton, who spoke about it years later on her podcast. She believed her team had an agreement with Letterman's producers that her jail time would be off limits. She thought she was entering a safe space to talk about her perfume. She was wrong. The interview started pleasantly enough. Then, with an almost surgical abruptness, Dave leaned in. How'd you like being in jail?" he asked the audience. Gasped, then laughed, and a nervous energy instantly filled the theater. Hilton, caught completely off guard, could only manage a tight smile and a quiet, "not too much." What followed was a masterclass in relentless interrogation. This wasn't a passing joke. It was the entire focus of the segment. Letterman became a prosecutor, asking what she had learned and what the food was like. Hilton, visibly shifting in her seat, did her best to steer the conversation away, saying, "Well, obviously it was a very traumatic experience, but I've moved on with my life." But Dave was like a dog with a bone. When Hilton finally tried to put her foot down, saying, "I don't really want to talk about it anymore." Letterman's response was a stunning moment of on-air honesty. He leaned forward and said, deadpan, "This is where you and I are different, because this is all I want to talk about." The audience roared. It was a perfect Letterman moment, but for Hilton, it was a nightmare. She pleaded with him, saying things like, "You're hurting my feelings." On her podcast, Hilton described feeling purposely humiliated and said that during commercial breaks, she begged him to stop, only for him to pick right back up when the cameras started rolling again. To his credit, Letterman seemed to realize he had pushed too far. He later apologized profusely. The next time Hilton appeared on the show, in 2008, he began the interview by expressing his regret, acknowledging that he had offended her and felt horrible about it. While they seemingly patched things up, that 2007 interview remains a textbook example of what happens when a guest's expectations are brutally dismantled on live television. If the Paris Hilton interview was an exercise in uncomfortable realism, our number 4 entry was a journey into pure, unadulterated surrealism. On February 11, 2009, actor Joaquin Phoenix sat down with David Letterman, and what followed was one of the most bizarre and baffling interviews in late-night history. The context here is everything. In late 2008, Phoenix had shockingly announced he was retiring from acting to pursue a career as a hip-hop artist. He emerged with a wild beard, shaggy hair, and dark sunglasses. So when he shuffled onto the late show stage, chewing gum and looking disoriented, nobody knew what to expect. From the first moment, Phoenix was sullen, monosyllabic, and seemed incapable of engaging. Dave, ever the professional, tried his best, asking about the new rap career, about anything to get a coherent response. Each attempt was met with a long pause or a mumbled phrase. You can see Letterman trying every tool in his arsenal. He tried gentle prodding, jokes, and feigned exasperation. Looking at Phoenix's disheveled appearance, Dave delivered one of his most memorable lines. "Joaquin, I'm sorry you couldn't be here tonight." Later, he quipped, "What can you tell us about your days with the Unabomber?" Each joke was met with a blank stare, which only made the situation more painfully funny and deeply strange. The interview ended with Letterman thanking Phoenix, who then took his gum and stuck it to the underside of Dave's desk before walking off. It was a final, baffling act of pure chaos. For over a year, the world debated what they had seen. The truth, it turned out, was that the whole thing was a stunt. Phoenix was staying in character for a mockumentary directed by his then brother-in-law, Casey Affleck, titled "I'm Still Here." The question that lingered was whether Letterman was in on the joke. While one of his writers later claimed Dave knew, Affleck has contended Letterman was kept in the dark, which makes his performance all the more impressive. Phoenix himself returned to the show in 2010 to explain it was a performance and apologize. Years later, he would reflect on the appearance, calling it horrible and one of the worst nights of my life, expressing regret for the uncomfortable experience. Our next guest was the philosophical opposite of a typical Hollywood star. He wasn't glamorous, he wasn't polished, and he had zero interest in pleasantries. He was Harvey Pecker, the irascible, working-class file clerk from Cleveland who turned his mundane life into the celebrated comic book series, American Splendor. Pecker was a recurring guest on Late Night in the 1980s, and their relationship was a slow-burn feud that finally exploded on August 31, 1988, in an interview that got Pecker effectively banned from the show for years. The context is critical. In the 1980s, NBC, the network that aired Late Night, was owned by General Electric, GE. Pecker, a man with a strong anti-corporate streak, viewed this with deep suspicion and came prepared for a fight. The interview started with their usual dynamic, but then Pecker, wearing a t-shirt promoting a boycott of GE, pivoted. He launched into a full-throated attack on General Electric, accusing the company of involvement in manufacturing nuclear weapons. This is the moment you can see Letterman's patience snap. For Dave, this was about the show's integrity. He tried to cut Pecker off, telling him, "This is really bad manners." The exchange that followed was one of the most tense in late-night history. Pecker refused to back down, accusing Letterman of being a shill for GE. Finally, Letterman had enough. He cut Pecker off, looked at him sternly, and vowed this would be his last appearance before abruptly cutting to a commercial. It was a raw, unfiltered moment of conflict. Pecker was indeed not invited back for several years. He did eventually return to the show in the mid-90s after it moved to CBS, the hatchet seemingly buried. But that 1988 showdown remains the defining moment of their strange and combative on-air relationship. If you're finding this look back at television history as fascinating as we do, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. There are bad interviews, there are awkward interviews, and then there is what happened on March 31st, 1994. This wasn't just an interview. It was a cultural event. It was a 15-minute segment so chaotic and profane it's been called one of the most censored episodes in American network talk show history. The guest was, of course, Madonna. Her appearance on The Late Show was not just a disaster. It was a defiant, landmark moment of televised rebellion that pushed David Letterman to his absolute breaking point. To set the scene, this was Madonna at the peak of her provocative powers, having recently released the controversial sex book and erotica album. She arrived at the Ed Sullivan Theater seemingly determined to hijack the show. The trouble began with Letterman's introduction, where he joked that she had slept with some of the biggest names in the entertainment industry. As Madonna walked out, she handed Dave a pair of her underwear and challenged him to smell them, which he awkwardly declined. She sat down, lit up a cigar, and the gloves came off. What followed was a barrage of profanity, with Madonna reportedly dropping the F-bomb an estimated 14 times. Each time the censor hit the button, the tension ratcheted up. Letterman, looking genuinely flustered, pleaded with her, "You can't be talking like that. This is American television. People don't want that in their own homes at 11:30 at night." Her response was pure defiance. She goaded him, insulted him, and peppered her speech with sexual innuendos. The audience was in a state of shock and nervous laughter, at several points groaning. You can see the struggle on Letterman's face. He was the captain of a ship being deliberately steered into an iceberg. The segment reached its absurd conclusion when Madonna simply refused to leave. When Letterman tried to go to commercial, she wouldn't get up, forcing him to awkwardly sit there, a hostage on his own set, until she finally decided the spectacle was over. In the aftermath, the interview became legendary, generating a massive public response and some of Letterman's highest ratings ever. For a host who prized wit and intelligence, Madonna's performance must have felt like a personal affront. It wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. For all the on-air awkwardness and hostility we've seen, none of it compares to the long, simmering, and deeply personal animosity that defines our #1 spot. This isn't about one bad interview. This is about a 30-year saga of friendship, betrayal, and professional rivalry. Based on decades of Letterman's own pointed commentary, the person who appears to have earned his most enduring disdain is his late-night rival, Jay Leno. The story is a Hollywood epic. In the 1970s and 80s, Dave and Jay were comrades in the comedy clubs. But everything changed when Johnny Carson prepared to retire from The Tonight Show. The man widely seen as Carson's chosen successor was David Letterman, but NBC executives saw Jay Leno, Carson's permanent guest host, as the safer choice. What happened next is the stuff of Hollywood legend, chronicled in the book The Late Shift. In a move Letterman would see as an unforgivable betrayal, Leno aggressively lobbied for the job behind the scenes. The most infamous story alleges that Leno hid in a closet at NBC to eavesdrop on a conference call where executives were discussing the succession plan. NBC ultimately gave the show to Leno, leaving Letterman out in the cold. The move was a profound shock to Letterman, feeling like a personal betrayal by a friend. Wounded but defiant, he left NBC and launched The Late Show. On CBS, going head-to-head with Leno, this began a 2-decade ratings war, but for Letterman, it was always personal. He rarely missed a chance to take a shot at Jay, his jokes often carrying a sharp, bitter edge. The animosity was reignited in 2010 during The Tonight Show, a conflict involving Conan O'Brien. When NBC tried to move Leno back to 11:30, Letterman used his monologue to relentlessly mock Leno, whom he saw as a villain who had once again stolen the show. Over the years, Letterman has spoken about the rivalry with a tone of weary disgust. He told Oprah Winfrey that he was never able to repair that friendship, describing Leno as the most insecure person I have ever known. Unlike the others on this list, this wasn't about a single night of bad television. It was a foundational wound that shaped the last half of David Letterman's career. The conflict with Jay Leno was a genuine feud, born from what Letterman perceived as the ultimate professional and personal betrayal. For that reason, Jay Leno holds the undisputed top spot, from the uncomfortably personal to the profoundly bizarre. These 5 encounters represent moments when the carefully constructed world of late-night television fractured. They reveal what happens when personalities clash, boundaries are pushed, and a host who values authenticity is confronted with anything but. Paris Hilton brought a brand, not a personality. Joaquin Phoenix brought a bizarre performance art piece. Harvey Pekar brought a political protest. Madonna brought pure, unadulterated chaos. And Jay Leno, in Letterman's view, brought betrayal. Each in their own way violated the unwritten contract between host and guest, forcing Letterman to navigate some of the most difficult moments of his career live in front of millions. While these interviews may have been nightmares for the man behind the desk, they became an unforgettable part of television history for the rest of us. They remind us that, even for a legend like David Letterman, sometimes the show goes completely, spectacularly, and unforgettably off the rails. So which of these interviews do you think was the most disastrous? Was it Madonna's profane takeover? Or Joaquin Phoenix's bizarre stunt? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out our other videos on iconic television moments. Thanks for watching.